Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of the Blue Oval Podcast. I am Ben Weisland. Joining me, as always, Garrett Zapman. How's it going, man?
Ben, I just finished up my last Zatland summer trip where I basically just leave DC for, I don't know, maybe 8 out of the 11 weeks that
Months
are
on
around the
end.
summer. Yeah, I mean, I'm away more from home than I am actually at my apartment in DC. So I just finished it up. I'm at my parents' house now, and then it's back to the grind for the upcoming cross country season. Although I know you have a trip ahead of time already. I know you're heading to Europe soon. So
Yeah, a few weeks away from that. So yeah, we're excited. So if I'm not on air for a week or two, just know that's why I'll be keeping it. I'll be paying attention though. I don't trying to think of what the big meets will be. I'm not missing like pre-nats or nutty comb or anything.
no,
So
I don't think so.
nothing huge.
Yeah, no, but don't worry. I'm sure Finn will hold it down on this side of the pond while you go see all of his family over there, right? So are you
Yeah.
actually going to the UK?
Yeah, we're going to London for a few days, and then we're going to Italy for the rest of it. So yeah, it'll be
Wh-
fun. Not
wh-
as far south as where Finn is from, but yeah,
Okay.
we'll have a good time.
All right. So, in terms of what we got today, ratings and reviews. First off, thank you to everyone who's been doing those. We have been doing quite well. Keep them going though. Apple +1, Spotify, I believe, +2. Got a review on Apple. They said a lot of confusion over the collegiate distance running recruiting and chaos and transfer portal and COVID eligibility. We keep it fast paced and use plain language. So, thank you. Really appreciate that. Look into the Stride Report. Hey, if you guys want a 14-day free trial for some of our plans on the site, monthly or annual, feel free to go check those out. Ben, we have basically a lot more to cover from the same thing as last time. Oregon transfers and then team rankings that we've continued to do on the site over the last week or so. I want to start with the Oregon transfers here. How about you kick us off and extend our conversation from last time?
Yeah, I mean, we had talked about the UCLA women moving, and UCLA men as well, leaving the program and going further up the West Coast. And now we can also announce that Sam McDonnell from UCLA is leaving and going to Oregon as well. But I think the biggest piece of news and the one that caught us, I think, the most off guard was Victoria Patterson from Columbia. So a non UCLA transfer this late in the season, going to Oregon as well. This is someone we feel like is a top 50 name, who can be an All American on the grass this year, has great track times, and if she is able to run this upcoming fall, is going to give this team a huge boost in terms of her firepower on the grass, but also just a little bit more of a longer distance oriented runner where they've brought in a lot of mid distance and they're loaded in the 15. So for them to be able to bring in someone that can run in the 3K, 5K, like that's going to be a huge addition for this team.
Yeah, so I've actually looked into this a little bit. Obviously, these moves come on the tail end of Mia Barnett and Dalia Frias also leaving UCLA to head to Oregon. I think from what I've been told, and from some of the conversations I've had, Barnett is not expected to be racing this fall, barring some wild exception to a waiver, which again it seems unlikely. But Patterson, there's optimism that she might be able to race this fall, and if that's the case, then that's going to be huge, like you said, for Oregon. They need more of a long distance name. She's a great steeplechaser, great 5K runner. We have her in our top 50. I believe she's 45 in our rankings. She's a really good talent, consistent, reliable, got better as last fall went on. I think this is a massive boost for a team that frankly kind of needed to like one more piece to really fill out this year's lineup. It would have been nice if Barnett's available this fall. Again, maybe she is, who knows? But um, this is a fun group now when you add Patterson to that mix. And I guess my thought process is like, how surprised are you that it's Oregon that is collecting all of UCLA's turnover and Patterson? Like, what's the thought where you're thinking, man, Shalane Flanagan's going to work here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the UCLA is a super surprising because I mean it's obviously geographically kind of nearby. It's another big time program. They're able to scoop up a lot of either really talented women with lots of eligibility left, or women who can come in and help right away. I think the Patterson though, like I said from the beginning, that I was surprised that she went to Oregon and that they were able to get her. I thought if she was on the market, someone on the East Coast or Midwest, Northeast, somewhere would have gotten her. But I think this is a really big statement of intent from Oregon. They want to be competitive this year. They're ready to really supercharge this rebuild, at least on the women's side. And then, while they've done that, they've also supplemented their future in huge ways. And I think that's where Sam McDonald, Delia Frias, like they come in, and you have these like super talented young women with lots of eligibility who, I mean, maybe they don't turn out to be high impact scorers for them in the future, but I would bet that at least either one of them will. And the more of those type of women you can get while you're being competitive on the national stage because of some of the maybe older women that you're bringing in, I think that's just super smart. They're kind of doing the what the Golden State Warriors try to do, that two timeline approach, which never works in the NBA, but I think it can happen
That
and
worked
work
for
out.
them. That did work for
Well,
them.
no, because they're going to be terrible as soon as Curry retires. There's no two
Ben,
timeline.
Ben, they won 4 championships. They did it with like those two. Now, granted, it was with the same personnel. If that's what you're getting at,
Sorry, what are you saying?
I'm saying, well, the Golden State Warriors, right? They won 4 titles, right, with this
Yes.
group, but they won those 3, and then there was a gap, and then they had a revival, right,
Yeah,
in this
I
a
think
year or two ago.
yeah, well, the two timeline was for them to be good, like do what the Spurs did, where they were going to be good after their superstar like Duncan left. Like
Okay,
the Warriors are going
fair.
to be terrible when Curry leave. Like they were trying to build up all the talent. Anyway, I think this is going to be able to work for Oregon. They have enough money, enough scholarship to be able to kind of supplement their future while not sacrificing their present. And I think that's going to be really exciting for the next few years for Oregon.
I'm a huge fan of Patterson, although I'll agree with you for what you said originally. I even had a coach who's out on the West Coast right now. They were even like, I, why? And they were like, why? They're like, I don't, it's just surprising. It doesn't really make sense. I think there were questions about the multi time transfer thing because she was originally at Duke and then Columbia. Oregon kind of just seemed like oh, why? Like, think everything was going well at Columbia. Now,
Yeah.
of course, there's so many things that we don't know. It's just a surprising move. Um, but yeah, it's an interesting move and one that did kind of catch me by surprise. So, because usually, like, I'm pretty tapped in. I've got some good sourcing. So the fact that I never even heard that she's on the transfer portal is a shocker to me. And maybe someone texted me and I just let it slip through the cracks. But surprising move. But wow, what a gain for Oregon. And a slight note here: Columbia really has to be feeling tough about this. They had a really nice squad heading into this year, and it was going to rally around Patterson. It's not that they can't have a nice squad; they can still develop a couple back end runners. Man, not having Patterson's just a brutal, brutal loss for a team that I thought could have made nationals.
I mean, the timing is just brutal, right? I
Yeah.
mean, to have this break. I mean, and who knows? Maybe this is in the works in July, but for this to kind of come out in August, like when everybody's just reporting back that I mean, they're not going to be able to go out on the transfer market and find anybody to replace her. Like it's too late. So yeah, I think that it does sting for Columbia, and I mean, it makes sense. I don't know exactly Patterson's eligibility situation, but might be just a preemptive move, be it that she would have had to have made anyway if she was going to run longer than her 4 years at the Ivy League.
And that's fair. That's very fair. So, okay, let's move off of the transfers. Let's begin our next section of teams here in our rankings. Last time we went from 25 to 20. We'll start at 19, see how far we get based on timing here. But I'll let you kick us off. Who is the men's team that we have at 19?
So yeah, at number 19 on the men's side, we have the Syracuse Orange. We briefly, I think we talked about them. What was it, a few weeks ago? When we were, I can't remember the context necessarily. But they bring back a pretty good squad from last year. We weren't super high on them last year, but they certainly exceeded expectations. I think 19 is a good spot. I would be surprised if they exceeded our expectations as much as they did last year. But I think this is a national caliber team that where a lot of other programs in this area are losing a lot of top men, they bring back enough stability, have enough youth in their lineup where we could see improvement. That I think they're going to be actually a pretty stable team out of this group.
And that's a great, I think, takeaway from this. I agree. I think you look at last year's squad and realize that they lose Noah Carey, Paul O'Donnell, Nathan Henderson. That's your 2, 3, 4 in a lot of ways, and not all the time were they, but they were pretty stable and they were
Hmm.
reliable and they had great scoring value for that team. And when you lose those guys, you start thinking, well, like, how is this team gonna be just as good? Like, how? And guess what? We said that last year when they lost their top 3 guys and their number 6 runner. So if their losses are still a lot, but even lesser than last year, then I'm scared to just toss this team away and ignore them.
Right.
Nathan Lawler is still a great low stick. Perry McKinnon, the transfer from Cornell, the graduate transfer, who I believe is that's who we were talking about in relation to this
Yes,
team a
that's
couple
right.
weeks ago. He could be another low stick as well. Asaf Harari, the Israeli distance talent, has run really well. Sam Lawler showed promise in his first cross country season. There's a lot of like in development younger guys who could really come up. They've got these great incoming freshmen, Benny Anderson and Connor Ackley, who are juggernauts on the cross country course. Really good talents. I think there's questions about whether or not they get redshirted or not. I've been told that they're probably going to be redshirted, but I also feel like this team kind of needs them, depending on how like Alex Comerford steps up and maybe a few other guys. But yeah, I mean, I like this team a lot just because I think if you start piecing things together, you can you can get a pretty strong lineup that actually looks really solid across the board.
Yeah, I think when and you guys mentioned this in the article about who will end up being that number five runner. I think will be interesting, but they have names who have at some point throughout their career, and I think I'm thinking of maybe Matthew Scrape in this particular
Hmm.
instance, have shown flashes here and there throughout their career, whether it's a one race or a part of a season. I think they're going to be able to cobble up enough. I think the coaching staff there, just the school in general, has proven that they're able to do that, and I'm confident that as long and I think really the X factor is Perry McKinnon. Like if he can come in and be a solid number two, number three runner that isn't that far behind Nathan Lawler, then I think you have a lot less concerns about that back end because you have a lot more stability up front. If he's not that, then the maybe the unproven nature of some of these other men or the inconsistency from the back end of the lineup is going to come back and hurt them a lot more. But I'm pretty confident that McKinnon's going to take a big step forward, especially after what he did this past outdoor season.
Before we transition, what is their ceiling and what is their floor this fall in our rankings?
Yeah, I think their ceiling is probably somewhere in the 12-ish region. I think that's more of a product of I don't really trust the teams ranked ahead of them that much.
Fair, that's fair.
But I think their floor though is also still a top 25 team. I think if McKinnon is not as good as we expect, I still think they're going to be good enough to make the national meet and still be like good. I just think they need him to be pretty darn good to be top 20.
Yeah, I would say 22 is their floor and like 13 is their ceiling. That's probably maybe 23 is their floor.
Yes.
I see them to be surprisingly a fairly stable squad despite losing the backbone of their lineup from last fall. So
Yep. Let's move on to the women's side. Number 19, Colorado State. So this is a team that we've kind of been keeping an eye on, I feel like, for the last few years as this young core has kind of developed and it's been fun to see them grow together. They are losing, I think, three big members of their team, but what we have seen develop over the last few years is they now have a potential true low stick in Sarah Carter, who has been excellent this past year, especially in the indoor and outdoor season. What excites you about this Colorado State, despite them kind of actually losing people from their team for the first time in a few years?
I think they're going to probably have the best firepower that they've ever had, or at least in a
I
very
agree.
long time. I think you look at what Annabelle Stafford and what Sarah Carter could do. They bring in the 952 steeplechaser from Lamar, Yasmin Ostrich. Like you start looking at that, you go, "Oh, that's pretty good. Like that's a pretty solid group." Granted, we still need to see them be more consistent overall. We need to see them truly step up into All American scoring roles. We don't know how their track performances are going to translate. And the rest of this lineup needs to be a little bit better. At times, that back end was a bit inconsistent. But you also step back and you're like, there's so many options. Surely surely they got to put together a complete top five. And yeah, they lose women from last fall, but I just keep looking at this team and I go, I don't really see how they're going to be that much worse, if anything. I don't really know how that's going to happen given this group and given how some of these women just recently stepped up.
I mean, yeah, you go through the line of their roster. The transfers that they have, I think, are
Hmm.
going to be huge. You mentioned Ostrich, but I think the potential of someone like Kenzie May or Audrey Thronson, like they could come in and provide, and they don't have to be great. That's the thing. Like they can just be fine, and or someone like Quinn McConnell, who a great middle distance runner who was on the team last year for I think at nationals and was their seventh runner. She can continue to improve and continue to build on that track success that she's had. I just think there's so many different options here after that top two that I think they're gonna figure out, and it might change from week to week, honestly, who that is. But I just think there's too much talent, too much potential for their floor to be very low.
Well, not only that, but like you also think about the veterans who had some really nice moments last year, like Emily Chaston, Lauren Nugaborin. Sorry if I'm butchering that name, but you know these are like really solid talents who have made improvements, have been consistent. They're now experienced. They know what the expectations are. They've had a year to develop, and the team's still pretty deep. Other women are getting better. I just see a lot of positives with this group. That back end has to be better. I think it's easy just to be like, well, look at all the options, but then not really see what some of the scoring impact is. So that it's there, but I do think that this is a fair spot, given what they did last year, given who they lose, but given the improvements that they've made. Um, I don't really know if I have a whole lot more to say other than that, but I do like this team. It's hard to dislike Colorado State.
I do like just the way they've built this team over the
Hmm.
last few years. I mean, they really did a true rebuild of they started with a good young core. They've ridden with this young core. They've added, I think, this year a few good supplements, but it hasn't been an overhaul at any point. And we've gotten to see them grow on the national stage together. Obviously, I think they would like to have grown into maybe a top 10 team by this point, and I think maybe a few years ago we thought they had that potential, but it's still really interesting just to watch their evolution in an NCAA where teams can look dramatically different year over year.
Yeah, and I will be interested to see how Coach Kelly Hart in her first year directing this program, the distance
Mhm.
program, how she'll handle this. It'll be a really interesting team for her to kind of like where can you kind of build and kind of go from here. So looking forward to that for her.
Let's go to number 18 on the men's side, and that is the Alabama Crimson Tide. This I feel like we could have put did we talk about them as one of the more difficult teams to rank, or did you struggle? I felt like I was struggling.
I feel like we got it. I mean, I feel like we were in agreement, and therefore it wasn't a struggle. But I think conceptually and like philosophically of how you believe in building a cross country team, they were a struggle.
So when you talk about high ceiling, low floor teams, this is it. You got genuine superstars up top of Victor Kiprop, Iliad Kipsang, Hilary Chariot. But w- w- are they going to perform at NCAA's? Is the first question, and the second question is, what are we going to see from the fourth and fifth spots? Because I think the coaching staff and the program has done a good job at looking for other men to finish out that lineup. They've developed some guys, and I think they're improving on that end. But they aren't to a point where they can sustain any of their top three not running particularly well. And these three, just quite frankly, are have been inconsistent at the NCAA level. If they all put it together and their back end isn't absolutely horrendous, this is a team that could easily be flirting with the 10-12 range. If they don't, and they have a bad regionals, they're not going to make like they're going to be having a tough time making NCAA's. Like it is just a huge range of outcomes for this team.
Well, luckily, I don't think with their regular season schedule, as long as they do run well enough at SECs or Joe Piani like they did last year, it
Right.
doesn't really matter like where they finished third, in their region, just because their region's not even that deep, anyways. So I'm not sure how concerned I'd be about their regional, but yeah, it's this thing where it's like they're so raw talented, like it's incredible how like that. This is maybe the best trio outside of like some of the top podium teams, right? Like they're really good, but you just look at the last year or two and they just haven't delivered. But the math, like you keep running the numbers and the math says like this is a 13th ranked
Yeah.
team, give or take a spot or two. And it's really frustrating when you're like, no, we know you can run better, but the liability, like, is this team, if consistently at their best, are they better than 18 where we have them? Yes, probably. But the downside and the lack of depth is hard to balance. Now, in their defense, it's very clear that the scholarship allocation for this team is largely, how do I put this? It's largely just consolidated to three scholarships.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe there's a fourth out there, maybe there's whatever, but it's very clear that like they only have three, and they're like, you know what, we've done the math, we know what the risks are, and we're taking advantage of it. And guess what? If they didn't do this, then we wouldn't be talking about them right now. So I
Right.
think they have to get credit for that. But it is tough to also be like, but what about everyone else? So
I know. I mean, it's been a strategy that they're getting the most bang for their buck, probably in terms
yeah.
of just having three stars, and they're able to contribute in all three seasons, and they can lead a cross country team to nationals pretty consistently. What they can do when they get to nationals is a little bit up in the air, but I think you're spot on in saying they deserve a lot of credit. Who do let's talk about maybe options for the fourth or fifth. Who do you have your eye on the most at being their best option outside of this top three?
I mean, Jacob Harris, I thought had a few decent moments, especially at SECs.
Hmm.
But I don't know if he's going to have the same upside. I mean, not having Brady Grant, you're looking for a little bit more of a spark at the back end. I think this Aussie guy, Charlie Rogers, could be a nice addition. Still young, but like I think he's run 818 for 3K. He doesn't have to be a stud. Like if he can just be Brady Grant again, that's totally fine. But I I, I would be interested to see what he can do there. I mean that's a pretty strong name with a lot of upside. Young, which concerns me, but I like him.
Yeah, I like him, and I think Joel Gardner is probably the other guy that I have my eye on. He's
Yes.
run
Yes.
14:08 in the 5K, but needs to take a step forward on the grass, and I think he absolutely could. And again, we we're not asking for these guys to be top 100 at NCAA's. If they can be top
No.
150, I think everybody would be pretty thrilled.
Even
And
top 170 is fine.
yeah, absolutely. So it'll this. I think they're one of the most interesting teams to watch. I think they're a lot like our Philadelphia 76ers, though, where wake us up when it comes to the national meet or the playoffs, and that's when we're going to judge them. Because, like you said, I think we're going to see them run as we expect throughout the regular season.
I'm going to move us off of the Alabama men and then move us to the Georgetown women here.
Hmm.
Um, Solid team. They lose Sammy Corman, and they lose, well, Katie Ann McDonald as well. But I want to say they also lose someone else. Oh, Grace
Grace
Jensen.
Jensen. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. That's a tough trio of losses. But you start looking at everyone else, and Maggie Donahue's so reliable, and Chloe Scrimgeour, great season from a great year from her last year.
Hmm.
She could be a true low stick. I think Chloe Gonzalez has had moments. I think they bring in Kelsey Swenson, transfer from Idaho, who's shown promise. They've got a few young talents. There's Melissa Riggins, who actually didn't have a
Yeah.
totally terrible national meet. I think she was 123rd. So, like, you start looking at this, it's a balanced lineup. They've got low sticks, they've got middle lineup support, they got upside, they got veteran experience. They're not as deep. They maybe don't have the same firepower, but I think compared to last year to what their lineup has now, 18 is a nice spot for them.
Yeah, I had mentioned them as one of the more confusing teams to me, and I
Yeah.
think I feel the similar way, just because they do lose three like very good scorers, um, but they have the potential to build on that. I really like what Melissa Riggins brings to the table. I think she could be a big X factor for them. I like the incoming freshman that they have. I just think they, again, this like Colorado State, they have a lot of good options behind two women who should lead this team very, very well. Except for, I think, in Georgetown's case, I kind of like their top duo a little bit more. And it'll just be interesting to see if they can cobble up enough to push them forward. And I mean, quite frankly, I think they can, but it's going to require some women maybe being a little ahead of schedule of what we were expecting.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, like, this isn't the most exciting team. Which again, just like I mentioned with Wisconsin, just because they're not as exciting doesn't mean that they're bad, right? Like, this is
No,
actually could be a team that could maybe return back to the top 15 and be like no issue at all. And I think a lot of this is gonna, at the end of the day, come back down to Kelsey Swenson. I think, how good is she gonna be? Because if she's closer to what maybe like a little bit lower than what Scrimgeour was doing last year,
yeah.
then that could be encouraging, right? Like, they don't really need anyone crazy, and I also think it's going to matter on like what's this back end going to look like. They've got a lot of high octane youngsters, but will they deliver on their talent? And I just don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a numbers game where, like I was saying with Colorado State, they just have enough potential that you would hope at least one or two break out in a nice way. Anything else on this team before we move on? Who's your pick for the number three scorer for them this year? Swenson.
I think it's Swenson. I think
Okay.
if
Yeah,
if
I
Gonzalez
I
is more
agree.
consistent, it's her.
Okay. All right. I think I'm in agreement there. Let's go to number 17 on the men's side, and that is Harvard. The tale of Harvard is the tale of last year. They have two of the best runners in the country. Probably, I mean, where would you rank their duo in the country of top duos? I mean, Graham Blanks, Acer Iverson. Graham Blanks, one of the best in the country. Acer Iverson, pretty much a lock for an All American.
Maybe like their top four, because I think BYU has a conversation, maybe depending, possibly. But I'm trying to think. They might be top
So,
three.
yeah, so it's what Stanford, NA, what, NAU?
NAU, yeah, NAU, Boston,
Yeah,
Young,
yeah, yeah,
and then I think
and
BYU has Klinger, and it depends on if you how much you like Noakes, I guess. Um, I think
yeah,
I think
that's
they're
pretty
top. I
wild.
think they're four. The top, top four duo in the country, maybe. Right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess when we go through the rest of these teams, maybe we'll realize that that's not the case. But yeah, I think that's the case, and that's why Harvard is ranked here. They struggled with their back end at times. When we talked about Princeton earlier, we talked about how they were able to beat Harvard at HEPS because they had better depth, and in a smaller meet, having a great 1-2 punch wasn't enough to make up for their lack of consistency and uh, talent in the 3 through 5 spots. But at the national meet, that is a big deal. And if they can cobble enough together in those 3 through 5 spots, they're going to be just fine, just like they were last year.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, they weren't fine last year. They had one really good race at the national meet, and that's what ultimately saved them. And I think you saw that with teams like Texas that were top heavy, teams like
Yeah.
Harvard, right? Whereas like if you just have enough, like sometimes your back end guys can just move up the field by attrition for guys who just aren't prepared for the national meet on other
Yeah.
teams. And I think we see that all the time. Um, Harvard, I think, though, I mean, their youngsters are so good. They bring in this Hungarian guy, Ferda Kovacs, maybe. I don't know exactly, but run 14:08. Sam Burgess, Charlie Ortmans. or Ortmans. Sorry if I'm butchering that. Owen Bosley, Drew Bosley's younger brother. All those guys have run under 9 minutes for 3,200 meters or the 2 mile. I mean, they've run well under 15 minutes for 5,000 meters in most cases. They've been great on the grass. Kovacs is really the guy here. He's run, I want to say, in the 840s for the steeplechase. This team's going to be dependent on them and how Shane Brosnan, their last year's rookie, steps up. But I think there's a lot of natural progression. Some of these guys are just way too talented to not step up and be improved. I think they're going to have enough. They're still not going to have the best depth ever, but I think it's going to be a little more sturdy, and I think they're going to have more seasonal consistency this year, relatively speaking, than last year.
Huh. I almost see them as maybe having less consistency, but also a little bit of a higher ceiling just because of these young guys. Like
Yeah, and I don't know. Is it like my thing? My like we just make up everything we talk about. What I'm saying though is that if just one guy breaks through, if just one of
yeah,
them breaks through, then it's naturally going to be a more stable team. Like
right.
even if everyone else falls off, it just took the same points as last year. So that's my problem.
And I hear what you're saying. I think my point is that one guy could break through one race and then he could disappear for another race, and then maybe another new guy steps up, and maybe they're consistent just because they like what Stanford on a lesser level, what Stanford did, where they filled their 4 or 5 spots in different ways almost every single week that they raced. I mean, it was a rotation of like 4 different guys, but they rotated through like the DiDonato, the Boyden, oh, who am I forgetting?
Heart.
Boyden Rousseau,
Well, yeah.
and yeah, a few others. And if you can just have like 4 or 5 guys that you can hopefully just get a good performance from 1 or 2 of them every week, I think they're going to be in great shape. But I just they scare me a lot. Like this, like them being next to Alabama is, I think, perfect because those 2 teams are just I think have huge ceilings if they can figure stuff out, but also have pretty significant floors. I think Harvard, you feel a little bit better about their floor just because their top 2 guys have been super consistent, but there isn't a whole lot of consistency on their back end. So I just I think this is a little bit of a shrug, and let's put the 2 teams that we feel like have a lot of potential and have a lot of possibility for falling flat on their face right next to each other.
Real quick. A Well, 1 point. Acer Iverson, I think, was 50th, 51st at the national meet.
Yeah, not
So
his best
him
race.
improving, I think he's going to have like at least 20 points cut off, right? Like
Oh yeah,
I
at
think he
least.
can probably cut off that team score at the national meet, which is crazy to think about considering how well they had already run relative to expectations. And then my other question here, or my question here is, who do you think is going to be their third scorer?
I think Kovacs.
I think it's Kovacs.
I
Yeah,
think by the end of the year it'll be him. Maybe not right away, but there's just too much. Like these PRs are too good. Like they're
yeah,
just too good.
I agree.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I feel like we forget because Graham Blanks has gone like supernova in the last year. Acer Iverson at one point was like the star for this
That's what I
team,
keep saying to people.
which
He was
which
the
is
guy.
which is like and like so like him finishing in the top 15, top 20, like even last year wouldn't have come as a huge shock. And so like if he were to do that again, like or to be in that range this year, I don't think anybody would be falling off their chair.
If
So
if he was 15 to 20 last year, I think we would have said that was a slight underperformance.
yeah, exactly. And so
He
he
was
just
great.
didn't have he had a bad race at NCAA's, but I mean I think he should be top 20 this year and they should be really, really good. I mean they have the potential of putting 2 guys in the top 10.
Yeah, yeah.
Which very few people could say. So all right, enough about Harvard. Let's move on and let's go to number 17 and on the women's side, and that is the Washington Huskies. All right, why don't you take me through this lineup real quick?
Ooh, this is a little bit of a tricky team to talk about. They lose Heisterman, they lose Gibson, they lose a couple of other women who I'm just not thinking of off the top of my head. But they bring back Sophie O'Sullivan, who had like a actually sneaky good year, and she just ran 4:02 for 1,500 meters at the World Championships.
Incredible.
Crazy, which I'm now wondering, I'm like, well, surely that has to translate somehow, right? I don't know if that's the case, but I like to think a 402 runner can translate, especially when she's more of a 1500 3K runner. And she had a nice cross country season. But then they add in All American ace Tori Herman. She was All American in 2021, fall of 2021. And then little off last fall, but still very good as a lead scorer for Kentucky. She's now coming
Yep.
over. She gives this team a nice spark. And then it really just comes down to everyone else. Like they have this trio of youngsters: Chloe Forrester, Borshim, and Norton Holes. I think if I'm getting those names correct, I apologize. They have moments of promise last year, decent even at times, but obviously still developing, still young. They were high school stars. Now let's see what really more else they can do here. They bring in a few Ivy League graduate transfers who I'm not sure really how much I expect them to contribute. But really, the core of this team is how good is that back end sophomore trio? It entirely hinges on them. I don't know if two of them need to be good, if just one of them need to be good, if all of them need to be good, but I am not quite sure what to really think of this team.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think their back end it will be certainly be important, especially with other losses of Markusich and Haley Herberg. Yeah, I mean, gosh, they lose a lot. But I think what O'Sullivan and Herman do, I think, will almost be as telling as what that back end does because they have the talent of being, especially like you mentioned, O'Sullivan, what she's done I feel like in the last few months has really shown that she's gone up a level. And if she can really put that to use on the grass, then you're talking about her. And I expect a pretty big bounce back year from Tori Herman. I think her first year in Washington, training with a lot of these other women, I think is going to be really exciting. And I think she's going to have a really good year on the grass. If those two can be like pretty good low stakes for this team. I think there's a little bit like we've talked about it with a lot of these teams. I feel like this has been a common theme. If they can have a strong top two, it takes a lot of pressure off that back end. And I think Washington with under Powell has done too good of a job for us to not expect them to be able to churn through people and to come up with a solid back end by the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of those women, I think it's going to be Forrester. I think one of them is going to really pop this fall. It's hard to say though. It's really hard. Like if just one of them pops, is that enough?
Yeah.
Like I said before. So yeah, I like this team in theory, but we'll see if I like them on paper. And I think that's the biggest factor here. Also, like India Weir, Kosana Weir, the transfers from Princeton and Yale, respectively, they've had moments. Are they going to contribute at all? I think they at least offer nice back end scoring. Like, if someone has an off day, they can at least limit some excessive scoring. Same thing with Naomi Smith. Naomi Smith has had some great performances in the past, not quite as of late. So then how does that translate? It's a little bit of a tough balance, but I I think I like this team, but it's also just impossible to know.
Yeah, I think this is a you trust the coaching staff, and I think the X factor ultimately becomes how good is their top group. Like how can like what I think they'll reach their ceiling depending on how good their low sticks are. And I think that their low sticks are a little bit more of a question mark than a lot of these other teams we've talked about. So they'll be a fascinating team to watch, and I'm sure they'll put it together by the end of the year. Let's go to number 16 on the men's side, and that is the Portland Pilots. I'm sure there's a lot of people that saw number 16 with Portland and thought maybe that was a typo. Maybe we got paid off by Portland or some other shenanigans. But if you look at what this team did in the regular season, you look at a lot of the guys that they bring back and just the performances that they had at Nuttycombe, at other races that weren't the West Regional. This is a team that you could absolutely see as a middle of the road top 25 team. It's that one regional race where they were so poor that they did not qualify for NCAAs that is probably holding a lot of people back. But you look what Matt Strangio did this past year. He probably went under the radar, a most under the radar like runner to run 13:30, like to run at USA's. It's like he was just good, so good throughout the track season. and is going to and was pretty good this past cross country season, and he's going to be way better than he was this past fall, this upcoming month. Like he is clearly taking a big step forward.
Yeah, and we've said that before, but I do agree with you. Like he has really taken a step up. It's the rest of this lineup where you kind of look at them and you go, this is a really good team. Like
Hmm.
a really good team. Like, how did this happen at the West Regional Championships? Both Peliquin and Strangio need to be a little more potent. They need to find more stability at the middle of this lineup because they're going to lose Kienzle, because they're going to lose Kirk, but they're
Yep.
going to have those replacements with a graduate transfer in Thomas Chaston from Colorado State, who's really nice. I think we both liked him quite a
Yep.
bit actually last fall. You bring in him, you bring in Jonas Gertson, who was clearly not at 100% in whatever capacity last year. He goes off and runs in the 1340s for 5,000 meters this past spring. He's clearly back in top shape and top form. Is that going to mean that he's going to, run as well as he did in the fall of 2021? If so, then this is going to be, again, a pretty conservative ranking. And then you look at the rest of this team, like 829 steeplechaser Astanis Ruiz, Ahmed
Yep.
Sato, who's a top steeplechaser. They've got a handful of guys who I'm not even just thinking about off the top of my head right now. Like oh, I just had these guys like Nola Hasbine or Chris Anderson or Teddy Buckley or Daniel Abdallah, a JUCO transfer from I think a year ago. So there are some dudes. They have the depth. They have the options. Now, granted, they all need to come together on the right day, but like it's actually almost like, hey, could we rank them as high as where we ranked them at the beginning of last year? And I don't think that would have been totally crazy either.
And last year, a lot of our thinking was, hey, they bring a lot of these solid, not spectacular transfers in, at least on in cross country, and to a team that's already pretty solid. And while we were like, they might not, they probably won't necessarily have anybody in the top 70 or 80 at nationals, but you know what? They're probably going to have a bunch of people right around that 100 spot. And I think that would have probably proven true if they had made the national meet. Um, and I think it's going to be a lot of the same story this year, but I think they have a little bit more oomph up front that protects them from maybe their back end not having or their pack not running extraordinarily well. There's just you look at a lot of their transfers who came last year, a lot of them are still here. You kind of mentioned that. And I think another year under the program, a lot of them, like I said, were solid, not spectacular, but are improving. Like Daniel Abdallah, like you mentioned, 28.51 this past spring, clearly taking a step forward. I think is going to be someone that can uh, contribute a lot more. Astanis Ruiz, continue to be a big fan. I think he has the potential of being their third runner and really being a big X factor for this team. And I just think there's too much here. I think we're going to see that West Regional performance was a fluke, and they can really insulate themselves a lot more this coming year by picking up more points. And in a West region that is still going to be pretty competitive, put themselves in a better position to avoid last year's mishap.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what it was. It was a mishap, and so we'll see what happens. The West Coast Conference meet is also like a really tough meet to like gauge, just because
Yeah.
it wasn't a bad race, but it wasn't good either. And like, how good was Gonzaga? And I don't think we really knew at the time. And frankly, I'm not really sure if we ever really knew how good Gonzaga was last year. Um, and so it was like, Coach Rob Connor doesn't always put a ton of emphasis on that meet,
Yeah. Or the
but
regular season in
or
general.
even the regular season in general, but they still ran well at Nuttycombe. So I'm so like I don't really know like what I think we're gonna get out of Portland. I think it's more upside than downside. Like I think their floor, like again, I know they didn't run well at the West Regional meet, but like they were still a top 25 team for throughout most of last fall.
Did we rank them despite them not making nationals?
I mean, they definitely stayed ranked the week after the
Yeah,
regional meet, but I don't
right.
know if they stayed ranked after the national meet. I don't
I
know.
think it was at least a conversation because yeah, like I mean, they had a great that great Nutty Cone performance. I think definitely stood out.
Let me take
All
a
right,
look.
and
Let me take a look real quick.
yeah, you take a look. I'll set up our next team, and you can butt in if we did.
Oh,
Um,
wait, hold on a sec. Let me check. And we did not. We did not. No.
okay, all right. Hey, we must have had a conversation about it.
Just
I
missed.
was
Yeah,
thinking
I
about
think
that.
we did. I think we
All right.
did.
Let's go to the women's side. Number 16, Arkansas Razorbacks. Um, Very interesting team here. I think you look at Mia Cochran as someone who we're both really excited about. Isabel Van Camp should lead this team. Um, it'll just be interesting to see what we get from the rest of this group. Taylor Ewart, transferring to Michigan State, hadn't had the best year. Laura Taborda transferred from Ole Miss. A very interesting, circuitous path to Arkansas for
Yeah.
her. Um, but they have names. It's just you're not sure who's going to put it together. They haven't been the most consistent team over the past few years. After I feel like losing their golden generation under Lauren Gregory and Karina Villoen and so many other great names
Taylor
in there.
Warner, Katie
Taylor,
Izzo.
yeah, so many great names, and they've been in the wilderness a little bit. I think that this year we could see some strides from some younger women that would really help us see a little bit more promise for this team this year and in the next few.
This team, the more I kind of looked at them, the more they kind of grew on me. I think Van Camp, there's she hasn't raced since February. I think she has an injury based on what I read, so that's not great. But we've seen what she can do at her best. She's like a really good low stick. I mean, like a borderline
Mhm.
elite, and she's great. Cochran, we're super high on. Thorvaldsen has had moments where she's just as good as Cochran. And I think we just need a little more consistency. She was great on the track this past spring, but there's been times where I was like, hey, I think we just want to see more consistency at this top end potential. We really only had a few glimpses of that. But as a top three, that was a really great group last year, and I really liked them a lot. And I thought that, that's a nice core to have. To board with a 950, 951 steeplechase PR, something along those lines, maybe 952, she should at least be good enough at the fourth or fifth spot of this lineup. And I think after that, it's Peyton No, the star high school freshman, great in cross country. I want to say she was like third at like NXN or Champ Sports, one of the two, one of the big national championship races.
Third at
She's
champs. Yep.
a Champs, thank you. But she's really good. Like I could see her being, like one of those breakout freshmen, for our best freshman of the year award kind of thing. Um, and on paper, that's a solid top five, like a complete top five. But is Van Camp healthy? Will Cochran take the jump? Is Cindy Thorvaldsen going to show her top end potential on a more consistent basis and then translate it to the grass from this past spring? Is No going to have like her top rookie campaign? And is Taborda going to be that stabilized fourth, fifth scorer who we think she can be? And with so many questions, I don't know if we felt comfortable ranking them higher than 16.
I was about to say it's rare you have that many questions about a team ranked this high. Like, and I think that's a testament to the amount of women that they have that could step up, and also the potential of those women. Like, if those questions are answered in the affirmative, then this is a team that is top 10 in their caliber. But even if they just go 50-50 on those, I think they're going to land somewhere in the 16 range. So I think we kind of split the difference in a lot of ways, ranking them at 16. But I think they're a team that could absolutely fall anywhere between 10 and 20, depending on how this season goes.
Yeah, I could see them being 9 and 24.
Yeah.
Like that anywhere between there. So I'm with you. Real quick, Cochran, you and I are both big fans of her.
hmm
Where do you think her ceiling is this fall?
What did she finish? What did she finish at last year? She
60th,
was
61st. It's not 60,
64th. 64th.
64th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
80th at Nuttycombe, 12th at SECs. Definitely grew. 24th at Cowboy
I'm
Jamboree.
thinking Maeve Styles, but yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ooh, I think she could be 25th this year.
I do too. I think that's almost exactly what I was thinking.
Hey, look at us, hive mind. Yeah,
Look at us. Who would have thought?
yeah, I think she is that good, and I think, and you can look at those results. Really, the only bad race she had last year was that 80th at Nuttycombe, and for a
But
freshman
she
in their
wasn't even
first,
that bad.
with exactly a freshman at in their first race at Nuttycombe is pretty darn like is not bad. It's not great, but it's certainly if that's your worst race, you're doing pretty well. So yeah, I think she could end up being a pretty stabilizing force despite being in her second year for this team. All right, anything else before we move on?
Let's move on.
All right, let's go to one of the most contentious teams in our rankings, and that, of course, is the number 15 spot, Washington Huskies. This is a team that loses their top star, Brian Fay. They bring back Luke Hauser, but they're going to be relying on a lot of guys who either haven't ran their best on the grass or did not run in a Washington uniform last year. I think chief among those guys is Tyrone Gorza, coming in as a freshman. He ran 29 flat in the 10K, 8:36 in the 32, 13:45 in the 5K. Like, he is just all around great at pretty much anything he does. And I think he's that 10K. I think is why we have a lot of confidence in his ability to step right in and be a contributor on the grass. I don't like relying on that. I am notorious for saying that I don't believe in men freshmen, but I do think he has a good chance of being a top 100 contributor, just not maybe someone that we're necessarily relying on being an all-American.
This is one of those teams where you look at them on paper and I'm like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be super excited about. And yet the options are endless. Like endless options. Like you're a little higher on Luke Hauser than I am. That's fine.
Yeah.
Let's say he's a low stick. But Brian Fay is not the only key loss here. It's Isaac Green too. Isaac
Yeah.
Green was really decent last fall. I mean, even he was good. I don't want to like insult him by saying he was just decent. He was good. Like he was like a borderline, like lead scorer almost in certain races. He was
Mhm.
great stability in a lot of that scoring. If you look at it last year, the scoring structure, it was consolidated. The points were consolidated so heavily to that trio of Hauser, Fay, and Green. And you
Yep.
take out Fay and Green, you're like, well, wait, now Washington's ranked almost borderline exactly the same spot where they finished last year, which was, probably way better than how they started their season. And it was.
Right.
But then you look at, well, they've got Joe Waska. Well, they got Nathan Green. Well, they got the Ozzy Thomas Diamond. Well, they got Tyrone Gores. They got Will Schneider, and they got who's that other rookie that I'm missing? It begins with a C. They got Big Man Staggs. They got Dashbach. Uh,
Corvin. Cruz
that's who
Corvin.
it is. Yes, Cruz Corvin, James Crabtree, and Evan Jenkins, or Jamar Deastole. Like someone has to be able to step up and contribute. Like statistically, someone will. Like the probability that one of those guys, as good as they are, will have a jump out season. I don't know who that's going to be. Sam Affolter is another name who has had decent to okay success at times. So someone's going to run well. I just don't know who that's going to be or how many of them it's going to be. And that's what makes me a little uneasy about this team. But also, I don't think I have a choice. I think I have to trust them.
I mean, you just look at the pedigree of the men that they have, whether it's from the high school ranks or from their collegiate experience on the track. You got guys like Joe Wascom and Nathan Green, who had just as much success, if not more, than Luke Hauser this past track seasons. If they can step up, or we're not saying that they're going to be Hauser on the grass, but if they can be solid contributors, that would be huge. They got someone like Leah Dashbach, who coming out of high school, we believed could be one of those guys that could contribute right away. He hasn't shown that because of injuries, but if he can get back healthy, he's someone that could help. I think Affolter is going to be perfectly fine as a middle, like 5 through 7 piece for them, and I think provide a little stability there. And then that's before you even get to all those freshmen and even sophomores who come in with incredible high school pedigree as well. I think, like we talked about on the women's side with Washington, you trust the coaching staff, you trust the program that these great coaches are able to mold these men and women who have shown that they have such great talent at the high school ranks. I just think when you compare that to a lot of the other teams around this range, and they're also losing a lot of men, I think it just makes sense to slot Washington right here.
History helps. The fact they ran so well on the track helps. They still scare me. Nathan Green, I think, is another name who we didn't even mention. Maybe I did. I don't know. But yeah, yeah, um, it's one of those things where again, you just have to trust them. I think it's because we got a little bit burned on them last year after ranking them so highly based on those
Yeah.
track results. But yeah, I mean, I still just refuse to not trust Andy Powell, and to place them at 15, I think is more than fair. I think they're probably even being like, we can probably be closer to 10. So we'll see.
Let's go to number 15 on the women's side, and that is Alabama. And boy, this team is going to look so different than it did this time last year. In comes Doris Cherop, but out goes Mercy Chalangot, Amara Stanisma, Flamina Asikal. Like that
And their
is,
distance coach Will Palmer
and their distance coach Will Palmer. That is as
and
much.
Sam McDonald.
Oh yes, and Sam. That's as much surgery on your team as you're going to see. Um, that isn't just based off of graduations. Like the only person that was graduating there was Jalinga, and the rest of that group left via transfers. And yet, this is a team that we are landing at number 15. A lot of because of Hilda Olamamwe, who has established herself as one of the best low sticks in the country. She's been super consistent, whether it's on the grass, whether it's on the track. And then we're also placing a lot of this on the incredible potential of Doris Cherub. The times that she brings in to the NCAA would rank her at top spots, but we have not seen her run a single race on the grass in the NCAA or on the track. So we are basing this completely on potential. And then the rest of the lineup is solid, but you really needed this top two to really perform well to be able to make sure that this team lands in the top half at NCAA's.
I like Joy Gill. I've made that very clear. That's no secret. I
Mm-hmm.
like Joy Gill a lot. Mackenzie Hogg, I think, is another transfer who's could be really good as well. Elka McCon, like I think we I think we had this conversation about another team last year in our last week in our podcast where it was like, yeah, they were clearly like, oh, it was Tulsa. It was
Mm-hmm.
Tulsa where, their top four were amazing, but their fifth runner was just way too far back. But for a team that was battling for the podium spot, yeah, that fifth runner had to be better, right? And now in this instance, it's the same thing, except McCon, for a team that's ranked at TSR number 15, she's actually really good. She's a really great value runner to have there. I think she was 32nd, I want to say, at Joe Piani,
Yep.
which for a team ranked at 15th, I think if she's going to be your third or fourth runner, that's really nice to have. Like, that's a really solid performance. So I do think that this team's a little bit better than maybe some people expect them to be. They don't really have any room for error, but I do think there are some really underrated pieces.
Jamie Reed, if we can see her, and maybe this is the year she breaks out on the cross country course. Like she did have that sixth place finish at SECs in 2020 and has run good track times. If we see her at the top of her game, then they have another really good option at that number 3 spot. They certainly have a lot of maybe I shouldn't say a lot, but they have quality women who can fill in those 3 through 5 spots. This isn't a you have 8 women and you're just hoping that a few of them pop. You know who the women are. They've shown that they can do it. They just need to put it together and do it on the same day, most importantly, because as you mentioned, they really don't have much margin of error because they don't have 3 or 4 other women lying in the weights to pick up the slack if they don't come through.
No, and they do have, like, I think Lily Walters, right, or Crawford West, and like those were really good high school runners, and they have a really nice like recruiting class from I think last year. So like the potential's there for maybe one woman to step up into a scoring role. But yeah, the options are limited. Do I like the options? Like I think Joy Gill is going to be pretty good. Like I really do. Her track seasons weren't amazing, but I really do think she'll be pretty solid. So um, we'll see what happens. But I do like this team. I think more than maybe a few others might if they were evaluating.
How high do you think they can finish? What's their ceiling?
13th, 12th.
Oh, come on. You're saying you're high on them and we have them at 15 and
No, well,
and your
there's a
ceiling's 12
difference.
or 13?
Well, no. I think that ceiling is reflected in this ranking, though.
No,
Like
I know.
but like I think in the same way where it's like who's an example on the men's side that I'm trying to figure out where I'm like I'm high on them, but I can't even think about it off the top of my head. Like
I
Arkansas,
mean, I
maybe
guess my
Texas.
the equivalent would be me with Washington. I don't think they have a super high ceiling, but I feel good about where they're ranked.
Like me saying that I'm high on this team, I think is just relative. Like I think as I
Yeah,
where I see this team being is going to be higher than most people. I think they'll be like this team's going to be like 19, 20 good. I'm like, no, I think they're probably going to be closer to 15. I don't think they're going to go much further or much lower. Well, their floor is actually significantly lower. I don't know if they're going to go much higher than 12th, 11th, 13th, right? Like somewhere around that
yeah.
range. But I do think that their general place in the NCAA hierarchy is higher than where others would probably place them.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. All right, let's move to the number 14 team in our men rankings, and that is the Arkansas Razorbacks. They bring in Kirami Yego, which was, I think, one of the bigger pickups in the transfer market that we saw. They bring back their star Patrick Kiprop. So those two should form one of the better duos in the country. Maybe not as good as the Harvard duo, but certainly a very good one. That'll save them in a lot of big meets. They bring back some interesting guys. Ben Sheeran, Miles Richter. They have Lexington Hilton, Elias Schrimmel. Like they got guys who have shown potential but haven't been super consistent or super great when it comes to the grass. And this is a program that has developed guys over the years. And if there's someone who's going to bring in a transfer in late August, it's them. I'm not saying that we factor that into our rankings, but you never know with Arkansas. They have had great success on the transfer market. And they have a guaranteed spot at nationals, which I think makes them a lot. They can treat the regular season in a much different way than a lot of other teams.
Um, you mentioned duos, so I did a quick double check. In addition to the teams that we already spoke about, I forgot there's Oklahoma State has Masoudi and Mayer, and
Yeah.
Wisconsin has Liking and Sharp. So we may have.
I would still. I think I'd
It
rather
depends.
have the Harvard duo over the Wisconsin guys. Maybe not Oklahoma State.
Yeah, the Wisconsin sure, and maybe the math even might work out in your
Yeah.
favor there, and I think it does. Um, but yes, so FYI there. Anyways, Arkansas. I really like them a lot. Like, I mean, to a point where I think their ceiling is like seventh in the country. Like,
Ooh!
yeah,
Wow! Here we
I,
go.
so I was not high on them at all when we first sat down. I was like, they're like maybe 18th. And then I kept looking at it and I go, well, Yego does swing the math closer to 15. And then I started looking, I was like, Elias Scrummel was actually pretty good. Like he actually had some pretty decent moments there if he's going to be this team's fourth scorer. And then I was like, oh yeah, Lexington Hilton ran 358, 748 or 749 or something like that.
Hmm.
I think he's going to be like a stud. And all of a sudden I'm starting to do the math. I was like, what happens if they have three All-Americans and a fourth guy in the top 60? What happens if they find a fifth guy who's just good enough? And I'm like,
Three All
this.
Americans.
I don't think it's unrealistic. I think you have two in Kip, Rob, and Yego. And then, or were you going to be shocked if Hilton's an All American? I don't think he's there yet. He has to prove himself. He has to prove that he
I
can
would
be.
be surprised. I wouldn't be shocked necessarily.
I don't know if I'd be totally surprised. Like, I don't think he's favored to right now, to be very
No.
clear. I don't think he's favored to, but like, that's why I think that their ceiling is. I think their ceiling is seven. Um, I I think it's unlikely that they get there, but Ben, okay, you're getting a little saucy with me here. But I do like them. Yeah.
No. I can understand because I think we both feel like the 7 through 12 range is not as good as it normally is. But no, I think that's a step too far to say that their ceiling is 7. Um, could I see this
Maybe
team
nine.
into the break top 10? Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Could I see them break into the top 10? Sure. I think that's about as high as I'll go. But they do have guys that I think we could expect one or two of them to pop off and be top 60, top 80 guys. And when you put one or two guys in the top 80 alongside two guys that we expect to be at least top 40. I mean, that's a team that is going to finish somewhere in the 10 range. So I think they have the talent. I worry about the consistency, and just the overall options that they have. I don't. This isn't a team flush with guys that you expect to be in the top 7 for them this year. Um, but they have the guys who at their top end potential could be a lot better than a lot of the other third, fourth, fifth options of other teams in this area.
Yeah, and I think I'll relinquish this. Yeah, maybe it's their ceiling is maybe more realistically closer to 9, but I do think there's avenues for that top 4 to be pretty good. The fifth runner leaves me a little with some head scratching. I don't know about concerns, but I it leaves me confused as to like what that's going to look like and how much of an impact is that going to have, and how good do they really need them to be. So um, yeah, I think it's fair to have questions and concerns, and maybe even wonder, like, well, really, how good can this team be if they don't have like a full top 5 that we feel comfortable about, and yet at the same time, the firepower just looks so much better this year compared to where it should have been last year.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, having Diego is a game changer. Like, again,
Yeah,
he was one of the best transfers available, and they got him, and that's a huge win for them. I think going to swing so many races and give them such added firepower. So, all right, anything with them before we wrap up with number 14 on the women's side?
let's do it.
All right, the Ohio State Buckeyes are our 14th ranked women's team. They bring back a great top trio. We all really like Addie Engel, Daniela Santos, and Andrea Kuhn also return. The question here with the Buckeyes, and I understand it, is the depth. I really like this top trio though, and I think they have a potential of finishing not much higher than maybe this ranking, but certainly I think we could have seen them ranked a spot or two high.
And this was an argument, and I think a fair argument. Um,
A split argument. We
it was a very split argument. Yeah, yeah. And to be fair, we had the numbers for my argument, except I then just deferred it to Gavin to put the pressure on him. So and we still won. So but yeah, I think really at the end of the day, I think you would typically more be concerned about a team like this, how they're structured with really just such limited depth and really
Mhm.
even at times no depth. But because of just how consistent and reliable the Engel, Santos, and Kuhn trio were, like they were so reliable and so good every single race. Like from the beginning to the end of the season, it's like, well, okay, like sure, they may have limited depth, but if they're just going to keep producing these top 3 finishes, like these 1, 2, 3 scoring punches,
Yeah.
then I guess it's only going to matter so much. At the end of the day, the really big X factor in this is Morgan Schmidt, who, don't get me wrong, she was far from perfect, but she had some really decent races for someone who was just beginning to come up as the team's fifth scorer, fourth scorer at times, really. And then she wasn't available for the postseason after the Big Ten championships. I mean, if you slot her in at, I don't know, somewhere around the top 150, I mean, they're cutting off a significant number of points from their national score. They returned everyone. They don't lose anyone, but I also don't know who they add. I don't know how much better some women are going to get. Of course, I said the same thing. You could have said the same thing about Santos and Kuhn last year, and
Yep.
they made great developments. So if Coach Virgo, Sarah Mason Virgo, is going to be able to do that with Kuhn and Santos last year, what can she do with the rest of this group this year?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where I'm at. You have that top trio. You have a coach in a program that has proven to be able to develop these women from uh, to at least fast improvement. Whether I don't think we're going to expect to see anybody join that top trio this year, but they don't have to be. They just have to be like you said. If they're top 170 names, then they're in great shape. They have the top trio where they really don't need to expect a ton out of their fourth and fifth. They just need to be okay. And I'm banking on that firepower just being better and pushing them ahead of teams that we maybe don't expect them to. And I think that's basically what happened last year is they just were they that top trio progressed in such a way where they just were way better and finished a lot higher and beat a lot of teams that we thought were better than them throughout last fall, and I could absolutely see that happening again this year.
Yeah, it's weird because I think this team's pretty predictable, like on paper, but I think you could have said that last year, and then no one would have predicted how good they ended up being. So, I will say this: I may have been on the opposite side of the favorable argument for Ohio State. Like, I may not have been on Ben's
Mhm.
side in favor of Ohio State, but I do like them. Like, they're a fun team. That top three is awesome, and I do think the back end I think they have to be better in some capacity. Um,
It's
so
hard to
yeah,
be much worse.
I'm glad you said it, but yeah, that's true. I mean, I think they really can. Plus, again, they're going to get back Schmidt, hopefully. I
Yeah.
think, and so it it's got promise. And like again, I think this is a team that's kind of capped in terms of their. Well, I don't want to say capped in terms of their ceiling. It's all determined on how good their fourth and fifth runners are. If they
Yep.
make massive jumps, then this is a different story. But if it's just the same team as last year, then I think we kind of know what we're getting.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, let's wrap it there. We got plenty of more rankings to go through over the next few weeks, but um, we're starting to get near that time of the year. Of we're going to be seeing some races start to pop up over the next few weeks. I wonder if we'll get any more late breaking transfer news. That's always interesting. See if the coaching carousel has finally settled and we can actually start talking about the things that we've been predicting, which is the races. And I'm certainly excited to get into that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm also looking forward to not having to write and edit massive essays, 2 essays a day. But we're getting there. D3 and D2 rankings, top 10 teams are coming shortly after we publish our D1 team rankings. So keep an eye on that. I got a whole lot more on the site. We're working. Ben and I are actually working on a project as well together. So we've got other things on the way. They're in the works. Go subscribe, thestridreport.com to get an annual plan, free plan. All first time users get 14-day free trials. So go keep that in mind. Apple reviews, Spotify, you guys know the drill at this point. But that's all I got, Ben.
And if you made it this far, go check out Lane 9 and be on the lookout for some interesting guests
Yeah,
potentially in the next few weeks. So,
yeah.
but until next week, Garrett, I'll talk to you.
I'll talk to you.